Alright everyone, here's a reminder. Google will determine what is or is not true because, much like their AI system is never wrong when it comes to demonetizing content, of course, it's capable of determining what is or is not true as well. What they're doing now is deranking RT and Sputnik. Now, I've got to take umbrage with some of the people here that are saying, well, this is, it's all bad. Sputnik and RT are not exactly the same thing. Sputnik is largely satirical as far as I can tell. It's so obviously not true. It's like the Weekly World News, I guess, of the Russian media. It's sort of like maybe most of the content of the Inquirer. Occasionally there's something true, but then it gets like warped usually. And a lot of this stuff is just literally somebody is doing some creative writing and dug something out of their asshole. That's really what Sputnik is like. RT, on the other hand, is just the Russian opinion version of a CNN or a Fox News. It's propaganda, quite clearly. Not always for the Russian state. Some of it's like pro-Iranian and stuff. It's a little like Al Jazeera or something would have its own bias. The British media has its own bias. But the level of bias, it's an attempt to report on what's actually happened. With Sputnik, you get, oh, there was a massive explosion. It must have been an asteroid. And of course, there was no actual fucking explosion. With RT, you get, here was a massive explosion. Could it be evidence of a new weapon deployed by the evil imperialistic US? It would be roughly the counterpart to a CNN here saying the same thing about the Russian state. Google should not be deranking RT. It is generally accepted as a proper journalistic outlet. Sputnik is a different story. And that would be like saying, hey, Google News is going to begin aggregating stories from the Weekly World News, The Onion, the Daily Current, or something like that. It's fake. It's not news. It's certainly not journalism. Then again, I would argue, hey, are CNN or Fox or BBC or any of these other groups, are they really journalistic at this point? Then I'm reminded again, as I mentioned before, about that Pew Research analysis of the first 100 days of reporting about the Trump presidency, showing the most massive discrepancy you could possibly believe between positive and negative coverage, and the most vast discrepancy between the total there and for the last three presidents that you could possibly imagine. And then I realize, of course, there is no real fair journalism going on in U.S. mainstream media. It doesn't matter if it's a right-wing or a left-wing outlet. It really doesn't. Fox is the same as CNN. The same sort of companies always advertise with all these groups based on demographic data, usually. It's like if you've got an older audience, you advertise your hover round. If the average audience is 20, you probably don't. It's like if I were taking AdSense, do you think that the sort of places that advertise on a CNN or a Fox would be advertising on my content? No, probably not. Because the average audience is, almost half a century younger, so it's not going to happen. But Google's decided to derank them. Well, why don't you derank CNN? It's a lot of what they cover is fake. It's like if CNN comes out and says, well, it's illegal for the average citizen to look at WikiLeaks content, which is a lie, a bald-faced, obvious lie, how is that news? How is it not fakery? The term fake news, these groups invent the term, begin flinging it at the alternative media, and then when it gets thrown back in their face because people are like, well, no, we don't trust you, the legacy media lies constantly, all of a sudden they don't want to use that term anymore. It's just like with Firefox. Some people jumped on me at the time. Because the report was, oh, Firefox is, teaming up with Soros, and it's going to be determining what news is or is not fake and whether to deliver it in your search results, basically. And at the time, people were upset. They're like, well, no, Soros isn't actually involved. Mozilla itself, I replied to one of my tweets on this. But then it's like, well, no, the fundamental central principle of the story, which is that you intend to manipulate people's search results based on what you do or do not want them to see, based on what you presuppose to be true or untrue, that is a true story. It is not false to say that because you're actually designing that so-called fake news filter. Fake news filter means manipulating data. That's all it means. If an outlet is not journalism whatsoever, is not even a news outlet but is fundamentally satirical, or it's just for entertainment, like a Sputnik, nobody cares if you derank them. I'm surprised Sputnik was ranked from the get-go. Why the hell was Sputnik even on a list of, hey, Google considers this news? On what planet are you living on? You take one look at Sputnik, you know that's not the case. RT, though, other than the fact that they have, yeah, a pro-Russian bias because they happen to be fucking Russia Today, what's the problem with the news that they have? So CNN has a so-called liberal bias, Fox has a so-called conservative bias, the BBC has I guess, an English bias. Who cares? Who cares if they're biased in favor of the Russian state? What, you don't think that firms here, you know, if it weren't the Trump admin, I suppose I would say, well, they're biased in favor of the U.S. government's policies. Lately, I'd say, no, they're biased in favor of the random people in Congress, like John McCain and Nancy Pelosi. Those are the people that they favor, but they're within the U.S. government. I mean, they're not foreign. They're not Australians, are they? You know, some of them have dual citizenship, but, you know, they're not from, it's not Australian dual citizenship. Let's just say that much. No, Google shouldn't be doing this. If RT is to be deranked, just don't rank any of these groups. Don't determine what is or is not news. Let people absorb the material that they want to obtain it fairly. It's just like on YouTube. If somebody trusts the source or doesn't trust the source, you algorithmically manipulating things isn't ultimately going to change their mind. Actually, you might do the reverse. By trying to suppress what you deem to be fake news, you make it cool and taboo and drive more people to it. It's just like with Limited State. The statistics were posted for that one Amron video there, one of the first videos to be put on Limited State. The number of extra views it was in the high 6-digit total. Just because it was put in Limited State and people found out, hey, this video is not fully available, I'm going to slap it all over the internet. And so on YouTube it was harder to find. Everywhere else it was real easy to find. It's just the way that it works. Trying to bury what you've done, ultimately, is now a dozen tech sites have done a write-up about Google's plan to derank these sites, and now more people will go, and beyond Sputnik and RT, it'll grow their long-term and short-term audiences. Again, just the way, it's the Streisand effect. I'm very, very surprised that Google, with all of its technological know-how and finesse, and with a million different analysts and scientists and engineers and PR consultants and everything else under the sun, I am extremely, extremely surprised that the people there apparently are blissfully unaware that the Streisand effect exists. You're trying to hide RT's results. The cool kids will look at RT, and the cool kids will become the next mainstream generation. You end up feeding them more pro-Russian material is what you're going to end up doing. You'd have to block them all together. Even that wouldn't work, by the way. People would use VPNs. It's like it's like trying to block people on Twitter. Oh, we're going to de-verify these users. Well, yeah, now a half a dozen sites have done a write-up about the fact that they got de-verified. People want to go check them out, see why they were de-verified. Wow, this might be a cool person. You know, Twitter's trying to abuse them. You know, we got to stick it to the man. Everyone's rebellious deep inside. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want you telling them what kind of information to actually see. Google, of course, being the parent company of YouTube, there's similar attempts to manipulate material here. There is an ongoing attempt. It's certainly affecting me. I look at the growth of my channel. It's slowed considerably once they implemented this. They are taking priority users, which means the CNNs, the Foxes, and the Kimmels and stuff. People who, in many cases, they don't actually do news. They're satirists like Colbert or Amar or something. Those people get priority status. So if they cover a current event or a social or political topic, the algorithm on Google gives them favorable ratings for when you search for anything it's tagged for, anything in the title, description, and so forth. It won't demonetize them, and it won't, potentially flag them as restricted. Their algorithm deliberately ignores priority accounts. So even a larger user like myself, who is covering the same things, who, I don't have any copyright strikes, I don't have any content warnings or strikes, I follow the TOS quite explicitly, I get fucked. It's a non-competitive environment because, no matter what I'm covering, if any of those priority users are talking about roughly the same thing, they're ahead of me in the search results. They get favorable related video coverage as well, which that's probably the main reason why the overall number of views has declined somewhat. It's about a 30% drop overall. In the number of views on my channel, despite the fact that sub count's still rising. Slower, but it hasn't faltered or gone away. The content hasn't fundamentally changed. The quality, I'm assuming, of the content in general hasn't fundamentally changed over the last, 30, 40-day period. So I'm not exactly sure why this would happen other than algorithmic manipulation. A new algorithm. Something to demote anyone who is not part of that very, very, very select class. It's like beyond getting YouTube Diamond or something. So it doesn't matter how many subs you have. You see some channels, if you look at like CNN and some of these groups, one thing that was always present there was they'd have a huge number of subscribers, but somebody with 1/10 of their audience could easily defeat them in views per video. Like they would be hovering around a few thousand. Meanwhile, I'm getting like 35, 40K. Some people are getting hundreds of thousands of views on anything they upload, and that's just sort of the way that it went. They had a lot of audience, but not a lot of attention was paid to their actual material. I think that they got pissed that was the fact, because nobody trusts them. And they peaked early, years ago in some cases. And so they decided to lean on Google to funnel more audience their way in hopes of growing faster and outflanking independent content creators. The thing is, there are a hell of a lot more independent content creators with collectively a much, much larger and more hardened audience than CNN or Fox or any of these groups will ever have. RT would be the same thing. Wasn't Russia Today's YouTube account taken down at one point, or am I thinking of a different group? Was it Al Jazeera? One of these groups, I can remember, I think it was in 2015, late that year. I can remember there was some foreign news and they got removed from like Google, or was it their Twitter handle or something, and everyone was really, really pissed off and upset. I think they got it restored though, but it was declared propaganda. I think it was RT, if I remember correctly. I know a lot of these groups have had problems before. Anything that's not U.S. mainstream media or British can have issues. It's like the Times of India. Are they going to get deranked because they made an unkind story about Pakistan and some major Google stockholder from the Middle East said, well, we've got to hush up these critics of the Pakistani state for diplomatic reasons? Is this really... Do we need to have the international espionage and intrigue game played out in cyberspace too? Fucking it up for billions of people? I don't think that's necessary. Can we keep the internet separate from all that bull crap and just deliver content like you're supposed to? Google, search engine. So give people results for what they're searching for. Don't fuck around with it all the time unless somebody is trying to manipulate the results for their own benefit. Like, some news site is doing like wrong tags, spammy tags or something. And that's different. Okay, you can crack down on that. Nobody cares. By the way, years ago, that was a big problem. Now the problem is the reverse. Now the problem is the site itself is trying to manipulate the material there. I think it's unfortunate that this is happening more and more on these sites. And another thing that people should be doing, again, as before, you should use alt tech as well. You don't need to just use alt tech and say, well, buy YouTube, buy Twitter, buy Facebook. It's not, nobody is saying that, but you should use it alongside those bigger firms. Like if you were using all of them roughly evenly, what would happen is eventually the alt tech sites would be roughly the same size. You'd have more competition. It'd be more even-handed. There'd be more sites representing the overall general use of time on the internet. It wouldn't just be a half a dozen sites basically gobbling everything up. And I think that spirit of competition would keep censorship and abuse to a bare minimum in most cases, because there would be alternatives. If one site's not going to accept you, despite the fact that you're not doing anything criminal or whatever, you're just being, offensive, whatever the fuck that means. You said, damn it too many times. You said poo-poo, and that's a bad word on our site. You'd say, bye, I'm going to a more mature site where people are, actually, they act like adults. They don't act like crybabies. That's about all. Peace out.